is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Solid episode coming up, Real Talkers. Glad you're here with Johnny and I today. In just a second, Drew Anderson joins us from the Narwhal. Rural Alberta is not backing down. Recent town halls, longtime farmers and landowners, you may have heard this, jeered senior political staffers who had come to pitch the Alberta government's plan for cleaning up decades of oil and gas well problems. This is a story that has been recurring, and folks across the country are aware of Alberta's so-called orphan wells. But those living locally, those impacted directly, are seeing broken trust, and they're demanding real accountability. Drew is going to join us from the Narwhal. He's been in the thick of this coverage, and he'll help us make sense of this divide, the Alberta of tight-knit rural communities and the Alberta of big oil power brokers. That to come on the show. Plus, the federal budget did contain details on shockwave therapy for Canadian veterans, but those that have been deploying shockwave therapy, those that have been patients of or receiving shockwave therapy, say that it's a move in the wrong direction. The therapy is being limited in terms of the number of sessions that a veteran can receive after serving their country. Obviously, the proponents of shockwave therapy are suggesting that, especially on the heels of Remembrance Day, this is something that needs to turn around. We'll get firsthand reports on that, and of course, we'll wrap up this episode with another fiery edition of the Flamethrower presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Your hottest takes on the stories of the week. This episode of Real Talk is happening with the presenting sponsorship of RapidX Financial. Real Talk, real Bitcoin. RapidX Financial gives you 3 easy ways to buy and sell crypto across Canada, either online with Interac e-Transfer at our trusted ATMs across Canada, or fully guided over the counter, on the phone, or in person. Whether you're an individual that's just getting started or a corporation that's looking to grow its Bitcoin stash to preserve assets, RapidX is there with real local people ready to help you at every single step. There's absolutely no bots. There are no hidden fees. It's just genuine support from a Canadian team that cares about your financial journey. Get crypto your way, anywhere, anytime with RapidX Financial. Made in Alberta. Let them help you get started today. You can check them out online at rapidxfinancial.com. Well, Drew Anderson is a senior reporter with the Narwhal, and that's where he's been digging into the story, our lead story today, for months. Drew has obtained internal emails, financing details, correspondence with regulators, and he's been there in person for some of these fiery exchanges that you may have heard about. Drew's been talking directly to landowners, to rural councillors, to policy experts who say that this problem is not going away. In fact, they say it's getting worse. We'll be referencing Drew's reporting that you can check out yourself at the Narwhal.ca as we welcome him to Real Talk. Drew, thanks for joining us again. It's great to see your face again. Fair to say that this is a story that, when you consider the magnitude of it all, it's a little bit surprising that maybe even more Canadians aren't talking about it?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you're probably right. This is a very large problem. It's not a new problem. This has sort of been building and growing for decades, certainly getting worse at this point in time. And like you referenced in your introduction there, Vitor Marciano, the chief of staff to the energy minister, warned a group of rural Albertans at a meeting fairly recently that this problem is going to get worse before it gets better, and caveat on the better there.
So, we'll talk about 2 stories you've published these just last week. We'll reference reporting that was released on November 5th and 6th. One of them, By the Wayside, reads the headline, Rural Albertans Angry at Companies Not Paying Their Bills. But I think it might make sense to start with your other story. Alberta let an oil and gas company in survival mode take over 170 wells, and now it's not paying its bills. Talk to us about MAGA Energy. Yeah, MAGA Energy.
Yes, and that is Make Alberta Great Again Energy. So Mega Energy is a really interesting company in that it is this rare sort of window, a sort of case study into what we know is happening with multiple companies, hundreds of companies, possibly. And it was this rare opportunity to actually get into what is actually happening and to see this documented. So Mega Energy, junior player, it's sort of, the company that goes in, snatches up a whole bunch of wells for really cheap. These are the sort of, get 100 wells for $1 kind of deal. We'll take the liabilities. We'll try and pull as much wealth as we can out of what exists with these old wells, hopefully turn a profit, and with the promise that, they will clean up those wells in the end. Mega, took over 170 wells, a bunch of facilities, some pipelines in September of last year. But I was able to get an email from the vice president of operations, Mark Ross, to a landowner who was, a little bit miffed about not getting their lease payments from the company. And he explained in clear language that they had lost 90% of their income months before the transfer happened. So it was this real sort of, black and white example of a company that was in financial distress that the regulator should have known about, that was transferred, all of these wells, facilities, and pipeline segments, despite the regulations being in place that are supposed to prevent this.
So
And
Drew,
then oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
no, I stepped on your toes, but I was just curious to know, like, for the city slickers or for the civilians that may not be 100% certain of what we're talking about or who we're talking about here with the landowners. When we're talking about wells, can you give us a general description of what they're like, the amount of space that they take up, the potential environmental liability, potential payback, or the return on investment that landowners may have been expecting to receive? Can you bring us up to speed?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these things don't look like much. I mean, we've probably all seen, the pump jacks
Sure.
off the highway, right? I mean, that's basically what we're talking about here. We're talking about a concrete pad with a pump jack on it, sometimes several on one area. But the area that they'll fence off around that is larger. You've got a picture up there showing Jen Stevenson with two pump jacks going through her gate. It's a giant area that's been fenced off, so she can't use that land anymore. That is for the oil company, it's their access, and then they pay her rent. They pay her a lease payment because she can't use that land anymore. It's this grand bargain that we have in Alberta. You can't say no to an oil company that wants to drill on your land. In exchange, you'll be made whole with these payments. Works good in principle unless the payments stop coming. So, you've got these areas squared off. You've got the landowners that expect to be compensated for it. And then they're also assuming, that these companies are going to come in and clean them up. You've got active well drilling, you've got pumping going on. This can spill, this can leach into the ground, this can contaminate the soil. This can leave your land far worse off than it was when they first got there. And so, you are expected, or the companies are expected to clean it up. And lots of them do that. A significant amount of them don't and leave these landowners in the lurch.
Okay, so the Narwhal's Drew Anderson joining us in our feature interview today, presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. So according to your reporting at the Narwhal.ca, MAGA already in survival mode. You've just shared with us in the internal email that you obtained, MAGA's VP of Operations said their revenue dropped by 90% after losing their processor. So do we know exactly what happened there? I mean, can you help us understand? I think that the average Albertan has been led to believe that when takeovers like this are approved, the Alberta Energy Regulator, the AER, is demanding some sort of a security deposit or some sort of a financial guarantee that environmental liabilities will be covered. I'm assuming that didn't happen here.
Well, we don't know about that. One of the biggest problems whenever you're working on this, and I mean, it's a story that I work on in one shape or form, all the time, is that it's really difficult to understand exactly what has and has not happened when it comes to the regulator. I spoke to law professor Sean Fluker, who also has studied oil and gas regulations in this province for a long time. And that's basically his big critique too, is that there is no transparency in terms of what the regulator is and is not doing. I mean, he said, if you go through these directives that they have, these rules that they put in place that are supposed to protect Albertans, they seem great. And, I've read through these things. It's, my particular form of torture is I read through regulatory
Yeah,
documents.
no kidding.
And they do, like it's all spelled out there. This is supposed to be, a functioning system that prevents things from happening, bad things to landowners, to the land, keeps the bad players out of the oil and gas industry. We have no idea what they're doing and what they're not doing. And when you get a case like this, where, you can see Mega being transferred all of these wells, despite the fact that they're in financial survival mode, despite the fact that they owed over $20,000 at least in municipal taxes to Sturgeon County, which is supposed to prevent a transfer from happening, that transfer still went ahead. So it raises all these questions about, what the regulator is and is not doing. You talk to the regulator, they say, we look at the financial health of a company. We have a holistic review that we go through and we look at all of these different factors. And if all those boxes are ticked, we'll go ahead and, say transfer all of these wells. If they're not, we won't, or we'll ask for a security deposit. Did they? We don't know. And they won't say. So it's a really interesting situation where you are sort of left to take the regulator at face value and just trust them that they're doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. But I think that we continuously see examples like Omega Energy in this province that raise serious questions about whether they are or are not doing that.
Yeah, I think, to speak candidly, I don't know that the average Albertan has any confidence in the Alberta Energy Regulator. People can Google AER Athabasca Fort Chipewyan if they'd like more ammunition there. The AER has been mired in controversy for a number of years. I don't want to just gloss over what you mentioned about Sturgeon County. The title of this episode, Drew, that you're joining us on is big in quotes, because if you're insolvent, I'm not sure if you're big oil and gas anymore, but big oil betrays landowners and taxpayers. This is something that everybody should care about, not just the affected landowners, not just folks in Sturgeon County, but you mentioned this ministerial order in your reporting that was supposed to prevent these transfers if there were large unpaid municipal taxes. And Mega Energy's taxes to Sturgeon County, as you told us, reportedly exceeded that threshold. So what do we know about why or how they still qualified?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the big lingering question. And I guess, stay tuned because I've got a bee in my bonnet on this one. So I'm still working on tracking down the exact figures. But I mean, Mega Energy owed Sturgeon County, the facts that we know, they owed them over $300,000 in taxes. They went to the county to try and get a payment plan in place to sort of, clear their debts and square that away. And that would be a key stepping stone to getting regulatory approval for license transfers, having a payment plan in place.
Okay.
The county originally, oh, sorry.
No, Drew, I keep dancing with you and I'm stepping on your toes. Just blaze through next time. I just want to get to our live chat here, powered by Park Power. There's a lot of folks in the know in the live chat, and then there's a lot of folks that are just calling it how they see it, which is the beauty of this audience. Mark Doran, you may know Mark from the Polluter Pay Federation. He actually sent us a whole bunch of background when he heard you were coming on the show. He's very encouraged that we're talking about this. But Mark says it's important to point out that there's no, quote, return on investment for landowners. He says they're entitled only to seek compensation for losses, not for rent, which is an interesting point that he's making. Alberta Girl says the AER is not a real regulator. Calling them a regulator is like calling Tony Soprano a police officer. Kathy says we clearly need a better way to authorize takeovers of these wells. If your company's not making any money, why should you get the go-ahead to pick up more of them? And Dubious says, you know what happens when I don't make my payments? Piles of late charges, and then I got to pay them anyway. What recourse does Sturgeon County or do these landowners have?
Well, Sturgeon County is in a really tough position. I mean, the municipalities really can't go after these taxes. I mean, they're owed $254 million in unpaid taxes by oil and gas companies. That's in addition to 200 million that's been completely written off by these municipalities, never to be collected. They're just given up on them.
Okay, and Drew,
And
just so we're clear here, like when we hear about Alberta's environmental liabilities, when we hear about cleanup costs, that's on top of the $250 million that's owed to municipalities.
Absolutely. So this is simply property taxes, the taxes that you would pay on your house. These companies, enough of them, are not paying them. I mean, the rural municipalities of Alberta says $100 million of the outstanding amount is owed by companies that are still operating, 201 of them. So this is an ongoing problem. They're not paying the taxes that they're supposed to be paying. I should point out the majority of them do, but obviously this is a significant problem. And then the environmental liabilities on top of that, I mean, that's a whole other ball of wax, and that's in the billions. You know, the AER estimates for conventional oil and gas liabilities are $37 billion. They've got almost no security on hand, and it's basically a good faith exercise that these companies are going to clean up in the end. And the ones that go out of business are going to be taken care of by the industry-funded Orphan Well Association. And then if you throw in the oil sands on top of that, I mean, we're north of $100 billion easy. And there's even been internal estimates from the AER that suggest that conventional oil and gas is actually over $100 billion in liabilities, environmental liabilities.
I think the average person employing their common sense is probably going to lead themselves to believe that that's something that's actually never going to happen. That we're talking about in many cases either insolvent companies or companies that are on the rocks. Are these low productivity wells? Like, what's the incentive for a company, by the way, that's already in financial trouble to take over 170 low producing wells?
Well, that's also a good question. I mean, I tried to put that to Mega Energy. They did not respond to repeated requests.
Oh, that's weird.
For an interview. I did manage to get into their office, which was harder to do than I anticipated because you need the key fob, but some nice gentleman let me into their building and I popped into their office one day. And I did speak briefly with Mark Ross, the vice president who wrote the email to the landowners, sort of talking about their financial distress. And he declined to speak on the record. So I'm not entirely sure what the business case was that they were making here. A since deleted version of their website said that their business plan was to go snatch up these marginal wells, hopefully turn a buck, and make go of it. And that's, that kind of business practice has a long history in Alberta. It's one of the big reasons why we're in this mess is these junior companies that are passed wells by companies that do have the wherewithal to clean them up. They will do these sweetheart deals where they give them a bunch of wells for dirt cheap because they just want to clear those liabilities off their books. And these smaller companies often don't have the wherewithal to clean them up, or even the interest in cleaning them up.
Okay, so I'm showing on my screen right now. People can check out open.alberta.ca, or they can just Google mature asset strategy. What we heard in the recommendations report. This factors into the story. This and Vitor Marciano, who many people will know as a longtime political staffer, political strategist, political operative. In the province, as you mentioned, Chief of Staff to Brian Jean, Alberta's energy minister, and then Dave Yeager, who authored the mature asset strategy. And he showed up at a meeting. It was at Warburg recently, somewhat unexpectedly.
Yeah. And it was advertised, Vitor Marciano was going to be there. So I drove out to Warburg for another one of these surface rights meetings because that's a pretty interesting character to show up in the midst of this. And then, unbeknownst to me, in walks David Yeager, who is a special advisor to Premier Daniel Smith, who is now on the board of the Alberta Energy Regulator and is the author of this new government plan to sort of get on top of this mess. And it was a fascinating meeting. I mean, you had Vitor walking in there trying to sell landowners in an area with a lot of sort of marginal wells that are, there's some significant frustration there. And he walked in to try and sell this plan, and it did not go very well.
Yeah, my understanding would be typically this would be pretty safe conservative territory. You reported on it. We're showing it right now. The Narwhal.ca back on June 24th of 2025. The headline: 2 Albertas, rural town halls and big oil's halls of power. I heard he was jeered. I mean, that's quite a word.
Yeah, well, and actually that article is another one. So I've spent some time in this area. This one was Kara Westerland, who is the president of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, was speaking. But then I went back again for Vitor for another meeting put on by the same group.
And that was that was your reporting on September 15th. Broken trust. Right. Senior political staffers met by jeers at meeting with rural Albertans. I want to establish here, Drew, that you've been reporting on this for months and months and months.
Yeah. This area has turned out to be a very interesting one, and a snapshot of other areas across the province where we've got these sort of older oil and gas facilities, these older wells, these sort of wells that are drying up, and we're seeing sort of this real problem play out where the economics aren't in place to sort of fulfill the grand bargain with Albertans of cleanup, of lease payments, of tax payments. But yeah, Vitor was a really interesting one. I mean, he walked into that room. I think he probably had a different idea of how this was going to go. And it got off the rails right from the beginning. He's trying to sell, the mature asset strategy, which is a list of 21 recommendations to the government for how to deal with some of these problems. They've accepted 20. We don't know which one they did not accept. And he was basically jeered at throughout the entire presentation. He was caught up in sort of, misinformation that he had in his presentation. I don't think he anticipated that some of the surface rights groups that he said were involved in consultations would be there. They stood up and said we were not. He said that the Rural Municipalities of Alberta was there from day one, talking about some of these municipal tax issues. Their policy guys stood up and said they were not, that they hated the mature asset strategy and didn't want to have anything to do with it. So it was a real, sort of tense meeting with people that are really upset about some of the problems that, at least according to Vitor, they're trying to solve.
And then you've got Jaeger, the author of the report that was pretty straightforward about the problem. I'm assuming you witnessed this comment. I'll read it verbatim in person. Quote, "I think I can say in this town, I now refer to this as the giant stinking pile of shit. This is a mess," he said. "It has always been a mess." That doesn't exactly instill confidence in anybody.
No, it doesn't. I mean, from his point of view, he's trying to suggest that now we're on it. He has authored another report into how to reform the AER and now sits on the board for the regulator. He spoke really bluntly about sort of the problems at the regulator and how that sort of plays out on the landscape. I mean, he was talking about the liability department at the regulator and said that he was horrified by what he saw when he first walked in there. And that, goes to what we were talking about earlier. How much is the regulator actually doing? How much of its own regulations is it enforcing? How much of a look is it having at these companies that are on the landscape? But yeah, he was pretty plain spoken. And then I got to, take that quote and bring it to Premier Smith at a news conference. It's not every day you get to swear at the Premier of Alberta and ask her to respond.
And what did she say?
She agreed. She smirked and said she would use less colorful language, but she said that she agreed that this was a problem. And I think, if you're talking to Smith, if you're talking to Marciano, if you're talking to anybody in this government, they're going to say that the mature asset strategy is their solution for a lot of this. It's going to make things worse before they get better, according to Marciano. We're going to see a lot more companies going out of business, he said. And that's going to cause a lot more problems. We're going to have a lot more wells transferred to the Orphan Well Association. We're going to see a lot more of these struggles. Where he and his critics sort of disagree is he then says, before it gets better. And the critics argue that the mature asset strategy is just another exercise in, socializing the costs and privatizing the benefits.
Jenny Yermy is in our live chat. That name will resonate with anybody who pays attention to environmental stories, environmental action in the province of Alberta. She says the regulator is preventing bankruptcies for the majority orphan owners. She says CNRL, Synovus, says these transfers delay the recognition of orphans, the responsibility of the majority liability owners. Plain Power says, don't worry, guys, taxpayers will pay the price. Billions for cleanup, but none for education or healthcare. And I saw an interesting comment here as well from, who was it, Alberta Rancher, I think it was, that said, I find it very ironic, said Alberta Rancher. I've lost the comment here. Something along the lines of, here it is, Alberta Rancher. I find it ironic that we're called landowners when in fact we have zero say when it comes to oil and gas coming onto our land. You made that point, but I think that a lot of people maybe weren't aware of that. It's not a choice.
No, I mean, you can say no to a renewables project. You can't say no to an oil and gas project.
Can we also point out that renewables projects are the only ones, it strikes me, that are required to pay up front as a liability guarantee, right? I mean, wasn't that one of the big things that came out of that renewables moratorium, was that there's more of an onus on renewable or so-called clean energy projects than there are on traditional oil and gas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can say no to it. They also have to pay hefty security deposits to cover that. That contrasts very sharply with what goes on in oil and gas. I mean, there are some security deposits that are collected. They're a fraction of the actual costs of cleanup. The regulator quietly put out its latest liability management report. It used to alert the media to that. It used to, host some chats with AER leaders about it, even some technical briefings. They didn't even alert us to it. I just discovered it yesterday when I was looking up stuff. So it appeared this week at some point. And I mean, the security that they've got collected on companies that are not in good financial health are just a fraction of the estimated liabilities that they actually owe. So yeah, no, there's a clear contrast there. And again, going back to the lease payments, with the landowners not being able to say no to this, the big part of that is like, okay, you'll get these lease payments to make up for the loss of your land. And if the companies don't pay those leases, this is a big factor that we haven't talked about. The government will cover those costs. So when you've got a mega energy that goes in there and all of a sudden stops paying its leases, those landowners then apply to a government tribunal, and that tribunal will pay the leases owed by the private companies with the promise that they'll then collect that money back. They don't. They've collected less than 1% of all of the lease payments they've made on behalf of oil and gas companies since 2010.
Yeah, just to state the obvious, when you're talking about government-backed financing or government picking up the cost, we're talking about you and me and everybody else in Alberta that's watching this right now, that's listening to this right now, I mean, like Gilles says, the reality is that our oil and gas corporate structure is backed by taxpayers. Profits go to shareholders. Losses are carried by taxpayers. Kathy wonders, can the municipalities put liens on properties, or would it even matter if a company goes belly up? Like, what other options have been explored here as far as you can tell?
There have been options to explore liens to allow municipalities to sort of go after these companies. That has been challenged in court and defeated. They don't really have that power at this point. Interestingly, the Alberta government, if it's not getting its royalties, can go in and basically seize operations from these companies. But municipalities can't. They are left in the lurch with little to no power. And they're also, really trapped in terms of transparency. I mean, I've spent the better part of 2 weeks just trying to get information on tax payments from Mega and from other companies, and they can't release that information. I had a collaborator go out to Sturgeon County to look at their tax rolls. It took 2 days of back and forth and setting up meetings to get a bunch of, essentially gibberish information without context that I then have to go back to someone else to try and go through line for line, pay, $40 a pop on about 20 different lines of information just to try and get basic tax information on what's owed, what isn't, and who's paying up.
Mark Doran also making the point that if a municipality was to seize assets, then they have the environmental liabilities. Nia says we're losing revenue on our farmland with wells so close to homes that off gases and pollution, she says, and pollution have become a real problem. So, Drew, I mean, let me just ask you a question, just as a journalist and as an experienced journalist, a senior reporter at the Narwhal. Is this story like different than everything else you've covered in any way? Or is there something unique about the investigative process or maybe the challenges you've encountered? I mean, I could invoke really supercharged, loaded words like conspiracy or cover up or scandal. But yeah, just a comment based on your boots on the ground approach to this.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just, how opaque it all is. I mean, we're talking about things that are decidedly in the public interest.
Huge.
This is huge, right? I mean, environmental liabilities, property taxes, our ability to function as a society, questions of right and wrong. But we have a public regulator that is supposed to be independent of government, that is supposed to be independent of industry, that is not doing the job, not protecting landowners, not protecting the environment. We've got a government that is wholly reliant on non-renewable resources to the tune where it was, 27% of the last year's government income. These are big things, and we've got a regulator that sort of, if it is providing information, it's providing information that takes, years to be able to parse through in any meaningful way. They sort of, obfuscate through transparency is sort of a line I've used with about them a lot of times. It is very difficult to get any kind of information that is useful, that is clear. It often requires, years of study to be able to recognize what's not there as opposed to what is. And then, recently the regulator, it used to at least answer questions, even if they were confusing. It laid off its communications staff and appears to be taking a completely different approach to media now, where they're not answering questions. And, it's a bit of a paraphrase, but basically they told me to go get bent on this story. And I don't see that improving anytime. So it's very difficult to get information. It's very difficult to get landowners to talk because they don't want to lose out on their lease payments and the benefits that they will get from having this stuff on their property. And it should be noted that a lot of them actually support oil and gas and have benefited from it too. So you've got all these multiple layers just sort of trying to prevent a lot of these facts from coming to light. And then if you factor in sort of, the all-encompassing role that oil and gas plays here. I mean, try and get an academic who studies wetlands in the boreal region to talk to you about oil sands pollution. Most of them won't or can't because they either have done work for an oil and gas company or will do work for an oil and gas company or are currently doing it. I mean, trying to track down this information in this province and to get people to speak up in a real meaningful way is very difficult.
I want to ask you just briefly. I might be putting you on the spot here. I'm not sure, but just in with regards to the leadership at the Alberta Energy Regulator, I remember. So Jim Ellis had resigned in 2018 amid a scandal of mismanagement of public funds. There was an investigation or investigations that had concluded that he, while CEO at the Alberta Energy Regulator, had, quote, grossly mismanaged public funds and assets by improperly using Alberta Energy Regulator resources for a side project. So then he was replaced by Lori Pusher. And I think, when people know investigative journalism, in addition to your work, the name Jenny Russell and Charles Rusnell will resonate with a lot of people, and folks can check out reporting for the CBC back in April of 2020 that the new, at that time, AER CEO was a central figure in a Saskatchewan scandal that many were arguing, opposition critics in particular, should have disqualified him from his new position as CEO of Alberta's energy regulator. That was a government land deal in Saskatchewan that had cost taxpayers millions of dollars and had triggered what proved to be a scathing audit. So Lori Pusher's in the role for several years and is now replaced in February of this year by Rob Morgan. I don't know a lot about Rob, except that he was, for about 40 years, working in oil and gas as an engineer. But it's safe to say that the leadership, the top leadership at Alberta's energy regulator, at least up until February of this year, was mired in clouds of doubt and controversy. Fair statement?
Well, I think that's a fair statement. Certainly the past two had their histories. I don't know if Rob Morgan carries the same baggage. He is definitely an industry insider. Seems like he's on the up and up. So we can't,
I know you're trying not to get sued right now, and we don't need the Narwhal to get sued, and we're not trying to get sued, but I'm reading what has been reported. I'm reading what is on the record, and some of it is undeniable. I mean, this is fact, but you're talking right now about an organization, an entity, the Alberta Energy Regulator, that people want to believe is looking out for their best interests, whether they work in oil and gas or not. And if you have rot at the top, and I'm not saying that that's the case currently, I don't know. But I do know through the past 2 CEOs, there have been nonstop questions around their competence, around the ethics of what put them into the positions, about whether or not they were fit for the role, about whether or not they were suitable to receive the public trust. I mean, what's the average Albertan, or even folks watching outside of Alberta, supposed to think about this? I mean, this is supposed to be where the buck stops.
Well, and I think you raise an interesting question without raising it is where does the buck stop? Because, you're talking about the leadership here, you're talking about the organization, but I think one of the biggest problems that we're experiencing right now in this province, it's not just this regulator, it's more widespread, but, we'll take the regulator as a case study. The government is way too involved in these agencies that are supposed to be arm's length. My journalistic colleague Emma Graney at the Globe and Mail had a recent story about how the AER canceled a public hearing on a coal mine expansion, and she was handed some Freedom of Information documents that show that was requested by the coal company, and they immediately got on the line with the energy minister's office. I have submitted questions to the AER, and somehow all of a sudden the energy ministry is answering them, even though I didn't have any communication with them. We've seen example after example of the government replacing boards, replacing CEOs, really heavy footing these arm's length agencies and regulatory bodies and getting involved in a way that raises all kinds of ethical questions about the conduct of government, the independence of regulation, and the freedom of these bodies to do what is in the public interest as opposed to the political interest of the ruling party.
Okay, so if I know anything about this audience, or at least this is the way when I listen to interviews, long-form interviews where we can really dig into the details like you've done with us today, Drew, I walk away and I go, well, what's the call to action? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Maybe you can approach this in the context of where your reporting is going from here, or what you would suggest the average citizen concerned about this to do. I recognize you're a journalist, not an activist, but what's the average person supposed to make of all this, all things considered?
Well, I think being informed is, that's the, God, that's such a cliched journalist thing to say.
It's true though, isn't it?
It is true. And I found it really interesting going out to, this area of rural Alberta where I was in Brazeau and Leduc counties and sort of seeing eyes opening with these landowners. These are people that some of them had reached out to me, and then it had sort of like, ballooned from there. But seeing people that have been oil and gas supporters have, benefited from it, their families work in it, and they still, they're not like activists against the oil industry and everything, but their eyes are opening up, and you start paying attention to these things. And I would be getting these phone calls, and it's like, Drew, did you know about, XYZ? Did you know about this? I think more people need to know about it. And I do really think it is this really fundamental duty of citizens in a democracy, and citizens in a democracy like ours, which is governed by oil and gas, these very powerful interests, to understand what's going on, to know that there are these sort of, ethical breaches happening, to know that there are these problems at our regulator and within this industry, and to really like understand what those problems are. And from there, answers, avenues, they present themselves. But speaking up, that's our basic duty as citizens.
People can check out your reporting, Drew, at the Narwhal.ca, including a couple of stories, long-form stories that I encourage this audience to check out to learn a little bit more about the personal stories of some of these affected Albertans. Drew's done a wonderful job of doing that as a senior journalist, a senior correspondent for the Narwhal at the Narwhal.ca, joining us today in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Thanks for your great work, Drew. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, you got it. Real Talkers, of course, we want to hear from you. In our live chat, powered by Park Power, Boomshanker X says, gosh, it takes courage and strength to stand up to bad behavior, and there are very few of us to do it. A comment that just jumped off the page here. Metamodern Sounds says, maybe Wiebo was right. Of course, referencing Wiebo Ludwig, sort of an anti-hero, a very polarizing figure in Alberta's history. Wiebo Ludwig, the subject of much news coverage. If you Google his name, you'll see it, including a very unfortunate incident where a young teenage girl was shot and killed on his property. But Wiebo was alleged to have, participated in destroying, I want to say blowing up, but I'm going off my memory, and I don't remember 100% if that had actually happened or if there was a conspiracy to blow up wells. But I know that he was obviously very antagonistic against big oil and gas, a tight, and my understanding is quite a religious man whose family had experienced, his tight family unit was experiencing illnesses, recurring illnesses and miscarriages, and Wiebo strongly believed that was due to the oil and gas activity in the region. He was the subject of a documentary, as a matter of fact, that I, back in the day, Johnny, this was fascinating, I actually hosted a screening of it with interviews with parties that were involved, and Wiebo Ludwig was actually in the room, in the theater. It was a hell of a thing. That guy, he's deceased now, but that guy brought a lot of energy into a room, and not like in a gregarious, like, hey, everybody, game show host kind of a way, in a very different way. But he was, I mean, gosh, maybe Wiebo was right. What an interesting comment from Metamodern Sounds. Denise says, yeah, Alberta's ethical oil, right? Tracy D says, every day another example of the Alberta advantage, she says, like the TB outbreak in Edmonton. Tuberculosis outbreak in Edmonton. That's a thing. I checked in with a healthcare worker, a person I know yesterday. I said, is this legit? Like, is this a legit? She sent me a screen grab of her email inbox, emails that have been going back and forth between Alberta health staffers and those that are working in public and social services front facing to make sure everybody knows, yes, there is in fact a TB, a tuberculosis outbreak in Edmonton right now. Les says, I wonder if Saskatchewan has the same problem. Alberta Rancher says, yeah, following up, by the way, just so we're clear, it's not just pump jacks affecting landowners. Pipelines are just as bad. Vamp Fashions, meantime, says that could be considered, your comment about Wiebo, vaguely threatening. I don't perceive any threat in that. That reminds me when we were talking to the education minister, Dimitros Nikolaitis, and Jason Schilling, president of the ATA, had said that the government has just declared war with their teachers' strike and their response to it to end the strike. They've declared war, and the education minister said, well, that to me sounds like a strike. I don't know if people will feel safe hearing this. I said, come on. Maybe Wiebo was right. I don't see Metamodern Sound saying that maybe Wiebo Ludwig took the right course of action, or maybe his actions were justified, but I wonder if he was right. I mean, I reference Athabasca Fort Chippewa. If you go through our archives, you can find more than 1,000 episodes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We've spoken several times with Chief Alan Adam from the Athabasca Fort Chippewa First Nation, and they have been sounding the alarm for years that contamination of their water, of their land, has led to higher rates of cancer among that community than anywhere else in the region. And when you actually hear Chief or other community members lay out the numbers, they're staggering. So people that are affected firsthand by this, in many different contexts related to industry, have been sounding the alarm for a long time. But what's wrong with the rest of us? I guess if it's not our water polluted out of our tap in our kitchen, in our downtown dwelling, or if it's not our land that's getting screwed, or if it's not our municipality that's out $100 million or $200 million, then maybe it's not our top concern. Boomshanker X says it's right, though. You can switch out oil corporations with whatever industry is making all the money in whatever jurisdiction, and you'll have similar stories. Anubius says, wait, is the government picking winners and losers in this market? That doesn't sound like a free energy market. Michael says, what kind of law strips away landowners' rights and gives oil and gas companies the right to destroy land without recourse? Keep the comments coming, friends. We'll get to more of what you have to say as this show rolls on. We do want to get to another story that's, as a matter of fact, I would say it's making news. It has been reported on, but maybe not as much as we think. We're 3 days removed from Remembrance Day. Lori Hahn, retired lieutenant colonel, former fighter pilot, was in here talking about mental health resources for veterans and treatment of veterans, either during their years of active duty or after their service to the country. And I think most of us could acknowledge that it's not where it needs to be. A new therapy, or a therapy that's been utilized recently and that's showing some returns, positive results for many veterans, is now not on the table. It's not going to be an option for many of them. We're going to find out exactly why and the impact of that in just a moment. We do encourage you, with your thoughts on this or any story that we're covering, to send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjespersen.com.
Edmonton is here because the river is here. So we care for it, protect it, share it. The water of the North Saskatchewan sustains all of us. It's a big job to treat and deliver it, river to tap, to over 1 million people, so you can have and enjoy a glass of the Sask. On tap, made local by Epcor.
If your family or your business is looking at sustainable or green energy investments, I want to make sure that Kuby Renewable Energy is on your radar. You can find them online at kuby.ca. That's Kuby.ca. You know, there's a common misconception that solar doesn't produce much power in the winter, but the truth might actually surprise you. Even with shorter days, your solar system still generates energy. In fact, cold temperatures actually help panels perform more efficiently. So thanks to net billing in Alberta and self-generation in BC, homeowners can bank excess power generated during the sunny summer months and use those credits to offset energy use in the winter. And so, of course, that means that your system is working year-round to reduce your electricity costs while you enjoy your energy savings no matter the season. If you're curious to learn more about how solar performs in Canada's colder months, you can check out the blog post on Kuby's website, Solar Panels in Winter, to learn more. You can find it all at kuby.ca. North Road Investment Council, recognizing that when it comes to investing, more and more private clients and institutions are asking a similar question. That is, if most mutual funds don't keep up with their benchmark, why not just own the benchmark? You hear a lot of people talking about the S&P 500 as an example. Research from Standard & Poor's in 2024 shows that 4 out of 5 Canadian equity mutual funds actually underperform the index that they track. At North Road Investment Council, they build customized passive portfolios designed to capture indexed returns while still respecting your values and preferences. And that means you can exclude companies you're connected to as an executive, or you can avoid industries that, well, you don't want in your portfolio. Maybe tobacco as an example. Even design your holdings for greater tax efficiency. At North Road, they celebrate the fact that markets are competitive. You can reach out to their team today, Marshall, Carey, and the group at North Road Investment Council. Learn more about how they can build your custom portfolio at northroadic.com. It's been a very exciting week for our friends at Freson Brothers as they've officially opened the doors on the first ever Mother Dough Bread Company. You can check it out online at motherdoughbreadco.com or just pop in to Winterburn Point in Edmonton. It is now open. A brand new brand. Of course, Freson Brothers has been telling us for 70 years, great bread makes a great sandwich. Not only are great sandwiches available there, but they've also, of course, got sourdough loaves, focaccia, baguettes, the world-famous Freson Brothers cinnamon buns, hot coffee, pair that up in the morning. How good is that? They're open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Again, you can check them out online at motherdoughbreadco.com. If all this talk about energy, if all this talk about industry, if all this talk about politics or public service is catching your attention, you're kind of feeling that call to maybe ramp up your skill set, maybe get prepared to re-enter a job market, I want to make sure you take 2 seconds to check out Athabasca University online at athabascau.ca, Canada's open university with world-class accredited online degrees and courses designed so you can complete your education wherever and whenever it works for you. Now is the perfect time to pursue that MBA you've always dreamed of, or maybe finish up those credits and get that undergraduate degree. There are dozens and dozens of programs and courses, more than 500,000 program and course alumni from over 100 countries. Unbelievable success with Athabasca University. Check out the AU Advantage today by visiting athabascau.ca. Well, this is a story that we wanted to make sure that we got to the week that we recognized Remembrance Day, because it's an important one. It's hitting a lot of Canadian veterans right where it hurts, literally. Veterans Affairs has quietly rolled out major changes to its coverage of shockwave therapy, which is a non-invasive treatment that many vets say has been the only thing that's actually kept them moving or working or out of chronic pain. So Veterans Affairs Canada has basically completed a review of extracorporeal shockwave therapy, or ESWT, and starting the 1st of December, these rules are going to change dramatically. And from that day on, this shockwave therapy will only be covered for certain conditions, and veterans will be limited to just 3 treatments total, like 3 treatments over their entire lifetime. It doesn't matter if you've been using this therapy for years, 3 sessions now starting December 1st, and then you're done. And here's the kicker. All existing authorizations terminate November 30th, like a week and a bit from right now. So even if you were approved for a course of treatment, even if it was working, it's being cut short. Veterans Affairs Canada has been saying publicly that this is about aligning with new clinical evidence, recommendations from its internal benefits review committee, but this is all happening within a broader post-budget environment. I don't have to tell this audience where the federal government is looking for savings across multiple programs. And for a lot of veterans and their families, that feels like this real story. Another benefit that's being quietly, very quietly, tightened in the name of fiscal restraint. Lieutenant Colonel retired Jim Hardwick has more than 30 years of experience in the Canadian Armed Forces, starting in the infantry. He also served as military chaplain. He was known in that role in particular for exhibiting empathy, humility, and a profound respect for others. Jim retired from the military this year, and he's become a patient of Echelon Wellness and an advocate for veteran healthcare. Igor Gimelshtein is the CEO of Echelon Wellness, the founder as well. That's Canada's first ever healthcare company dedicated exclusively to military veterans and RCMP. With 6 clinics open across the country, they've served nearly 4,000 veterans and RCMP members to date, with over 20 veterans on staff in various positions. I want to welcome both of you warmly to the show, and thank you for joining us. Igor, right out of the gates, real talk. Did I do okay with your surname?
You actually did better than I can do. You know, it's not your fault. My parents burdened me a little bit, so you did fantastic.
Well, I'm grateful to have you both here. Thank you for your grace in that. Help us understand about this therapy. Jim, I want to ask you in a minute about the personal impact that it's had on you and the return in with regards to health benefits that you're seeing. But Igor, for people that aren't familiar with the therapy itself, tell us what we're talking about.
Sure. So you said it correctly, extracorporeal low-intensity shockwave therapy. Handheld device as part of a bigger machine that translates water into electric current essentially, and re-stimulates and regenerates the area onto which it is applied. So for erectile dysfunction, it regenerates blood vessel growth and blood movement. For chronic pain or tendinopathies, it regenerates collagen, but in a similar way, it heals. This same machine is also used for lithotripsy, for the elimination of kidney stones. So this is not something new. This is something that has been around for a long time and that VAC themselves have been covering since 2017. To add insult to injury, and in a dramatic twist of great irony, the armed forces medical units are themselves currently looking to acquire these same machines to apply to soldiers on base, in addition to those that they do today. So it all seems a little unfair to us. And I think you covered in the introduction, you know, our perspective on why things are happening here.
Jim, thank you for your service, first of all. This is the week where we should say it 365 days a year, but in particular this week, I want to recognize that and thank you for 30 years of esteemed service to your country. Talk to us about the impact, if you're willing, of that service on your sense of well-being and how this specific therapy got on your radar. I think we might have a connection issue here. So what we'll do is we'll see if we can get that sorted out. Jim, Johnny will work with you behind the scenes. We're just having a tough time hearing you. I want to make sure that we hear it. Igor, in the meantime, let me ask you, why is it, your business, this Echelon Wellness, is specifically working with veterans and law enforcement? Why is specific focus for these individuals so important?
So first of all, they deserve it. These are the people that put life and limb on the line in its truest form. And as you mentioned in Remembrance Week, we will always remember and lest we forget. And it is something that has been a deep passion of mine for a long time to give back. I am an entrepreneur. And so after conferring with many veterans across the country over many years, decided to actually start a company that addressed their actual healthcare needs. And we do this by focusing exclusively on military veterans. There's about 500,000 military veterans in Canada. A lot of people don't know this. Less than a third of them are accessing any types of services at all from Veterans Affairs. And it's our job to remove the barriers to care and provide a one-stop shop that makes healthcare convenient and accessible for them.
Okay, so you mentioned erectile dysfunction. I know that could obviously be a quality of life issue for a lot of people. Are we talking about what sort of other ailments are we talking about specifically related to military service? Like, is this a treatment for PTSD, for an example?
It's a great question. So according to the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department, 85% of male combat veterans with PTSD suffer from erectile dysfunction. According to our data, 65% of those patients that get shockwave therapy for erectile dysfunction see a clinically significant improvement in their erectile function, according to the International Index of Erectile Function. So yes, it is all encompassing. It treats the family health. It treats the mental health. And the same therapy used in a different way also treats the physical health. Just on October the 30th, the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs had a forum on the prevention of veteran suicide. And one of the key things coming out of CIMVAR, which is the Canadian Institute of Military and Veteran Health Research, was that chronic pain and mental health are two of the leading indicators of veteran suicide. These are both things that are directly treated by shockwave therapy, and it is something that is being taken away. And so one might make the argument that they don't think shockwave therapy is effective, but it's working for patients. Our clinicians think it's working for patients. Patients themselves think it's working for them. And so what is better, taking something away that is working for them and is safe and effective, or making the supposition that it's actually not good? You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't say you're doing something good for veterans and at the same time take away something they say is working for them.
Yeah, it's tough messaging. Jim, let's try it again. Let me see if I can hear you. Oh, gosh, it's just not working, Jim. Johnny, we'll try one more time, and we'll see if we can make it happen. I sure appreciate you, Jim, being here. We'll try to find some other way to get Jim back on the show. But, Igor, let me ask you, for Canadians that are going to go, well, hang on, how much does all of this cost? Like, you know, when it comes to the bottom line, the government says that they'll fund it for 3 treatments and no more. 3 treatments per individual that would qualify, but no more. What's the billing to the government on this? What are we talking about?
So interestingly, this is really what they call a veiled cut or an invisible cut. The government is not talking about money. They are saying they do not believe it is clinically effective, and therefore they are limiting the number of treatments. The argument completely falls apart. When we look at some of the world-leading urologists that happen to be Canadian and participate in the Canadian Urological Association guidelines, they believe that this treatment works, is safe and effective, and is actually a better first course alternative than some things like pharmaceuticals and eventually penile implant surgery. And so it really depends where you measure cost in the healthcare system. Yes, this is a billable service, just like physiotherapy and massage is, but that is part of the sacred bond of a veteran. When they sign up to go to the military, they're told that if they're injured, they will be taken care of when they get back. And I don't want to speak for Jim because he's having some technical issues, but you know, he came, they wouldn't help him to identify where he could seek help. They wouldn't help him find a healthcare provider that could seek his needs. And frankly, most healthcare providers either don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually understand what veterans need. So Jim came in after service, came in for his first intake appointment, and ended up scheduling 88 different appointments with healthcare providers over the subsequent 6 months. Mental health, physical health, sexual health, all encompassing. And we're able to do that. And all together, that interdisciplinary approach significantly reduces the long-term costs of the healthcare system. That is proven. That is factual.
Yeah, I mean, in our live chat right now, powered by Park Power, Dan says, what's that we were, again, supposed to remember to never forget? He says, you know, the National Health Service in the UK was created after World War II for the people, and our healthcare system was supposed to be modeled the same. Christine says, thank you to every veteran for their service. Every veteran deserves any health care they need, including mental health and physical health. There is no health without mental health. What do we, like, when we talk about these 3 treatments, Igor, like, you're going to tell me obviously that every patient is different, and maybe one patient will have one treatment and find that it didn't work for them or they didn't love it. Maybe one patient would have, you know, their health restored after these 3 treatments, but you just mentioned, I think you said Jim had like 88 or 90 treatments. Like, what's your assessment of the government's limit of the 3, Veteran Affairs Canada, I should say?
So just to clarify, the 88 is across everything. So that's
Okay.
with, mental health counseling, physiotherapy, and shockwave therapy as well. What I can tell you is that no patients are healed after one treatment. No patients are healed after three. There is debate upon which the initial course or initial protocol is, but it varies sort of between 8 and 12 sessions. It's universally understood. You can, put it into ChatGPT. What is different for each patient is the maintenance treatment. So some patients respond to maintenance and they feel like they need to come in and get a boost on their shoulder, once a month. Some come in twice a year. What's important is that should not be a lifetime limit. It's recurring. It's the same way as going for a chiropractor. You can't tell somebody their back hurts, go to the chiropractor 3 times. What happens when it hurts again?
Yeah, no kidding. So with regards to advocacy, or trying to impact change on this, like I recognize you're running a business, and of course you're making yourself available for interviews like this, but what sort of follow-up has there been? What sort of correspondence has there been with Veteran Affairs Canada? Has there been almost like an industry-wide thing? Are you going it alone as an entrepreneur? Like, where does this stand right now?
So we are, even though we're relatively small and we just started in February of last year with a single clinic, we may very well be the largest independent service provider for veterans in Canada. We don't quite know, but certainly when we call Veterans Affairs, they know who we are. As soon as we found out about this, I'll never forget the day, July 24th, my daughter was born at about 11 a.m. By just after in the afternoon, my phone started blowing up. I had more than 20 calls from different 20 veteran friends, and I thought somebody died literally. So I went home and I started fielding these calls. And what I found out was VAC had sent these letters out to patients. And we immediately told them, let us try to figure it out. Let us engage our healthcare providers, independent medical experts, and let us work with VAC. And we were working well with VAC, medical correspondence back and forth. And October the 8th, they told us that they wanted to schedule a meeting between our medical experts, and we're probably the world leaders in shockwave for military veterans, and their benefits review committee and their healthcare group team. We mobilized our doctors, military doctors, urologists, orthopedic surgeons from all over the country, ready to help, again, in the spirit of remembering our veterans and helping them get access to healthcare. They were all at the ready. And then on October 14th, exactly a month ago, we were actually told to go away, that VAC was standing behind their decision. They were not open to having any medical discussions, and we should cease correspondence. And that's when we began to try to plead publicly for Veterans Affairs to change this. Forget about the business. There are thousands of veterans that rely on this and thousands more that it could help. Veterans Affairs says that there's 500 or so patients that were approved for the treatment. That is true. That's before July 24th. And another great irony of this process, since that time, they've approved more than 500 patients. So even they're saying it's safe. So we just don't understand what's going on.
Igor, I was talking to a mental health practitioner just yesterday about this. I was telling them that you were coming on the show. They were saying, you should ask him about ketamine. And I said, well, I'm not sure he's an expert on ketamine, but she said to me, the point that she wants to make is that ketamine would be another example. Psilocybin would be another example. People would know them candidly as magic mushrooms, of mental health therapies that are working for some people, but are not yet accepted in the mainstream, that some people would see as intuitive and fund-worthy. In other words, that the government should coverage like ketamine, psilocybin, or others. And she suggested that this shock therapy as well, this shockwave therapy, would be in that same boat. And I want to read a tough comment for you, and I want to get you to respond.
Yep.
But an audience member here says, where was it? They said, to be honest, they said if we weren't talking about veterans, or if veterans were taken out of the mix here, this is T6, says, I hate to be the devil's advocate because veterans are our heroes and I have nothing but respect and love. But if you take veterans out of this equation, we would be calling this quackery. What do you say to the doubters? What do you say to T6? Do you acknowledge the controversial nature of the therapy?
So what I can tell you, first of all, let's just talk about psychedelics, which are approved by exception and are not yet studied. This is an approved medical device. It's used in every hospital. If you think that the Cleveland Clinic is a high-standing medical institution, they specialize in shockwave therapy for chronic pain. Every sports team has this equipment, and it's actually administered by highly specialized orthopedic surgeons or physiotherapists or nurse practitioners. So to anyone that thinks it's quackery, talk to my friends who came back from combat and weren't able to tie their shoes. Come back and talk to my friends that came back from combat and weren't able to have sex with their spouses, and tell me it's quackery. That medical experts do not agree. This is not some new thing. Again, VAC has been paying for it for 8 years. This is a veiled cut. This is nothing to do with healthcare. You can go and look up the Cleveland Clinic and shockwave therapy, and you can read all about it. This is not new. And they're right. If it wasn't for veterans, I wouldn't be fighting for it either, because every elite athlete gets access to it. And as far as I'm concerned, veterans are elite athletes that have come home.
I think that for many Canadians, the very first bit of research that they're going to be doing on this therapy is going to be prompted. I'm going to be honest with you, Igor. That's my story. I didn't know much about this at all until I heard about the implications for veterans, until I heard that some of the therapy was being defunded and being limited. I want to thank you for joining us to talk about it. I regret that Jim wasn't able to tell his story, but we want to thank him as well, not just for showing up today, but for his service, of course. And I'm happy to hear that he's experiencing positive outcomes. If people want to check out what you're doing, they can go directly to Echelon.ca. You're across the country, aren't you?
Yes, all the way in the east, St. John's, Bedford, Fredericton, and then in Ontario, we have Ottawa and Kingston, and our first clinic in Alberta is in Edmonton.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much. That's Igor
Thank
Gimelshtein joining us on this episode of Real Talk. Real Talkers, we want to know what you have to say about this as well. I appreciate the comment from T6. I appreciate Igor taking the comment, taking it head on. We don't want anybody to come on the show and just have an easy ride, and we want to know, I mean, the facts here. Of course, it sucks that Jim's connection just wasn't where we needed it to be, because that's what I'm most interested to hear about is the personal story, right? A guy that has 30 years of experience in the infantry, even serving as a military chaplain. Like, you know, I mean, that's just even its own thing. Think of the stories that he would have heard. Think of the supports that he would have provided to his colleagues, the men and women serving alongside him in the Canadian Forces. Christine says psychedelics are being rigorously researched. She wonders if this therapy is being clinically researched as well. She says no. We can do some more Googling on this. I'd be curious to know about it. Yeah, I was talking to a buddy the other day who's experienced not technically a stroke, but he experienced a debilitating, just a neurological event that took this big, strong ox of a guy and it basically rendered him unable to walk for quite some time. And it's been remarkable to see him fight to get back the basic things that we would take for granted. And that includes, walking. That includes basic things like, putting on a green, swinging a golf club, playing hockey with your buddies in a casual setting. The things that if you're just kind of going through your day-to-day life, you would totally take for granted, right? And this guy's had to fight for every inch of the way back. And we were skating together earlier this week, and he was talking to me about what's been working and what's not, or why he believes that he's able to lean over and tie up his skates again, right? Like Igor just said there's been veterans that have come home and can't even bend over to tie their shoes. And my buddy, the things that have been working for him are things that I initially, when I heard him talking, I was like, because they were, unconventional, unproven in some circumstances, even controversial methods. And we know each other well enough. We've known each other for 15 years or so to talk about that and to have that conversation. And I have my own preconceived notions about some of the things that he's been taking, and some of the therapies that he's been paying for and participating in. And he leans over the table and he just looks at me and he says, Jespo, you know what? He goes, it's working for me, and that's all that matters. And at the end of the day, really, that's all that matters, isn't it? Now, I know someone's going to write an email in and they're going to say, well, what was your buddy taking? And give us the details. And that's not my place to share. But I will also say that, there's power in placebo. There's power in real therapy. There's power in obviously proven therapy. And then there's a lot of gray area. And people will wonder, we've talked about this before, and I'm not going to get into COVID, and I'm not going to start talking about that. That's polarizing and very divisive. But I will say that the bigger picture, outside of the pandemic, outside of alternatives to like vaccines, there has been a robust, and I think for the most part, a positive discussion around alternative therapies. Do you feel the same way? Send me a note. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment on the YouTube episode if that's where you're watching. I've heard some people, swear by the sort of the homeopathic approach to medicine or their naturopath. And then I've spoken with physicians, with surgeons, with oncologists, cancer docs that curse that type of approach because they've seen firsthand patients of theirs, in some cases, walk away from what you might call Western medicine or what you might call mainstream medicine in pursuit of alternative therapies. A personal friend of mine who we lost to an absolutely vicious brain cancer just a few years ago when everything else failed him, when modern medicine was unable to turn around what he was experiencing. He and his family traveled internationally to try an alternative therapy. Why? Because nothing else was working and because they were desperate and because his life was at stake. They tried everything right up until they couldn't try anything anymore. I don't know that you can blame somebody for trying or exhausting every alternative, exhausting every avenue when everything else that they've tried hasn't worked. And I always try in evaluating stories like these to walk a mile in the shoes, or in this case, maybe the boots of the individual that's experiencing the mental health challenge or the chronic pain or what have you. I guarantee that this episode is going to reach somebody that resonates based on their firsthand experience, and we would ask you, if you're inclined, if you're willing, to send us a note with your insights so we can better understand this story. These stories happen, and this coverage happens with the support of Real Talk partners, and that includes, when it comes to healthcare and conversations about healthcare, the iconic Royal Alexandra Hospital. They're celebrating 125 years of doctors, nurses, porters, janitors, staffers, security guards, everybody there at the Royal Alexandra contributing to life-changing, transformative, and in many cases life-saving care, not just in the Metro Edmonton region, but across Alberta and, of course, with patients served across Western Canada. The Royal Alexandra is one of Canada's busiest hospitals, and we're joining them in their capital campaign to raise funds to support the initiatives and the innovative treatments that have set the Royal Alex apart for a century and a quarter. That includes their campaign this year that we're proud to be a part of. You can check out givetoroyalalex.org to learn more about that. And don't forget, every Tuesday here on the show, we present a story of one family or one individual's connection to the Alex. It's Echoes of the Alex, and we're inviting your submissions to talk@ryanjespersen.com. You can check out givetoroyalalex.org to learn more about the campaign. Please give generously today and be part of the Royal Alex's legacy of care. California Closets, custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home, and it all starts with a free design consultation. If you're down in your basement, you're down in your storage room this week, maybe this weekend, digging around for those holiday decorations and realizing that, gosh, you really need to get your storage, you need to get your organization under control, it might be time to visit californiaclosets.ca and request that free consultation. The cost of your custom designed closet or any other space is determined by the size, complexity, materials, accessories, lighting, special features. That means that they can design a space to fit any budget, and it's all guaranteed for life. You can request that free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. Hey, Play Alberta is seeing Albertans win every single day, and that includes $10,000 daily winners via the Play Alberta app, where, of course, you can always check out playalberta.ca as well. And there's a bonus for Real Talkers, a $50 casino bonus when you make a minimum $50 deposit with the code Ryan50. That's Ryan50 for a $50 casino bonus with a minimum $50 deposit. You can find out details, playalberta.ca, the promo code Ryan50. You must be 18 or over to play, and if you do decide to gamble, please use your game sense. Don't forget Thursdays on Real Talk, stories of Alberta wins presented by our friends at Play Alberta. And if you've got charity on the brain today, and if you're looking to make an impact with young people, in our home province of Alberta, may we humbly recommend UCAN Youth Services. This is a nonprofit charitable organization that's helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. That includes their Verto project. If you know someone 18 to 24 years of age that could use an earn while you learn type structure, a 20-week pre-employment program that helps young adults 18 to 24 transition out of harm's way and back into school or into the workforce, make sure they check out ucan.ca. And if you're an employer that's looking for entry-level employees that are reliable, that are motivated, that have training and a skill set that's been honed by expert workers at UCAN Youth Services, make sure you make contact with them. They have great partnerships with IKEA, with Tim Hortons, and other big employers, and it's paying off in spades. It's a wonderful way to address Alberta's employment crunch right now, and of course, a wonderful way to put young people back into the workforce. You can find details today at ucan.ca. I know that we're going to have a ton of response to our story on big oil betraying landowners and taxpayers, and we want to remind you that these conversations that we do have here on the show continue over weeks and in many circumstances over months. And that's why we want to encourage your involvement in this Real Talkers. In particular, if you're living in one of those municipalities, in one of those areas that's been impacted by the non-payment, by these financial liabilities of property taxes, and you have specific thoughts on that, we want to hear from you. If you are involved in the oil and gas industry and you've experienced something that perhaps was alluded to in our interview with Drew Anderson, but you feel like there's more to the story or more to say, you can send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjespersen.com. You can send your emails in confidence. Please do request anonymity at the top of the email if you'd like that to be considered. This show and the editorial presentation of this show is much stronger. It's much deeper with feedback from Real Talkers. You know, we wrap every episode, the final episode of every single week, with your hottest takes, and that's why we're asking you for these emails, because this has become our favorite tradition, our favorite 5 minutes. That's right. This is the Flamethrower, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. These are all real emails or YouTube comments submitted via the Real Talk YouTube channel. How about this one from Cam in a Pizzeria, who says, "Hey Jespo, as a small business owner, following your conversation November 13th with Naheed Nenshi on minimum wage, I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts." He says, "I'm not firmly for or against increases to minimum wage. Every business operates differently, and a single policy doesn't affect every single business in the same way." Says, "But in our shop, our payroll has a target of like 20% of revenue. So when wages increase, something else has to adjust, which is typically our prices, our staffing levels, or the hours that were available for service. It's most important to recognize that minimum wage and the actual cost of an employee are not the same. For example, a $15 an hour wage translates into approximately $18 an hour once you paid CPP and EI and WCB and vacation pay and all those additional employer costs. So in my mind, we are already," says Cam, "at an $18 an hour minimum wage. These additional costs are always overlooked by people, and they are very real." Cam says, "An increase would also bring my employees down to minimum wage on paper, and that creates another challenge. So now I'm expected to raise everyone's pay by an additional $3 an hour to maintain their existing wage gap," right? So his employees making 18 right now. He says, so now then minimum wage goes to 18. Now they got to go to 21. He says, I guess, okay, let's do it. But small business, that compounds the impact significantly. If the minimum wage is raised to $18 an hour, I can adapt, says Cam, but there will be consequences. Most likely higher prices, reduced hours available to staff, because for me, payroll needs to stay near that 20% target. Cam says, "I'm not arguing against increasing it. I'm just saying the conversation needs more nuance, especially around the unforeseen circumstances that don't show up in the headline numbers, but have very real effect on how small businesses operate." That's Cam at a Pizzeria. Thanks very much, Cam. What about this one from Coreen, who says, "Jespo, on November 12th, your interview with Mr. Brian Lilley, and he talked about how, in his opinion, kids should be in school. On September 30th, Truth and Reconciliation Day. On November 11th, on Remembrance Day, so they can learn about these parts of our history. Does he, or unfortunately too many education ministers, not realize that for weeks ahead of those days, teachers are teaching and sharing about this history and building connections? Like, to have those days then as stat holidays allows for families to recognize and honor the people and their history in their own way. Or if they choose not to, that's their choice as well. Once again, including educators in these types of discussions and decisions might actually help make informed decisions. Coreen wants more respect for teachers in the process. What about this one from Robert, who says, Jespo, your November 12th interview with Brian Lilley, something that set me off, had me swearing, Jespo. It was when the conversation turned to the floor crossing and Andrew Scheer going on a man-baby rampage. Low expectations for mediocre idiots, says Robert. Says Scheer was an early adopter of the convoy. He sent a pack of online goons to attack Rachel Gilmore. He got physical, allegedly, with a staffer, and he had a hissy fit at a floor crosser, Chris D'Entremont, and Lilley just, laughed it off. He really showed his rebel media roots. Political violence isn't something that we chuckle about as though, Andy's just some howdy-doody looking simpleton. It's a joke. Stop letting this stuff slide. From Robert. What about this one from Jason, who says, Jespo, Matt Jeneroux's resignation, his retirement as a member of parliament. My thoughts on the timing, says Jason, may have something to do with the confidence vote that Pierre Poilievre will face in January. You have an MP step down when there might be a leadership race triggered, creating a by-election riding that's somewhat safe for a new leader here in Edmonton. It kind of seems like maybe it sort of works. Pure speculation, though, that from Jason. Jason, I'm not sure that riding is as safe for the Conservatives as you might think. What about this one from Chris, who says, Jespo, November 4th, your Doug Ford, I would never apologize to Donald Trump episode. I fell out of my chair when you said people have been telling us your biggest investment or your biggest storage of wealth should be in your home or real estate. Chris says, don't listen to those people. Depending on your situation, that could be the worst advice anybody could give you. That's not real talk, Ryan. That's crazy talk. Home ownership, says Chris, is a money pit. Even as dinks, dual income, no kids, once upon a time we had to argue with a home builder to spend less than what our bank had pre-approved. We knew that affordability didn't end with your mortgage payment. We knew that there'd be insurance and repairs and property taxes and utilities and cable and internet, and it would all eat into our disposable income, and we'd be able to max out and diversify other savings, TFSA, RRSP, RESP. Check out northroadic.com. Was more important than home ownership, says Chris. I wish I would have found Garth Turner's The Greatest Fool blog earlier. He says he's a great read. Home ownership, despite what we've been led to believe, is not for everyone. Renting is frequently more affordable, but emotions cloud judgment. That from Chris. And how about this one from Laura, who says, Jespo, I'll try to be brief. Labor rights are human rights, and the right to strike is part of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and our right to assembly. I'll also remind Real Talkers that the government writes the law, but the government does not author morality. In the early part of the 20th century, it was illegal for women to vote, says Laura. There were women-led demonstrations and protests until rights were codified. In 1951, or up until 1951, it was illegal for Indigenous people to vote. And if an Indigenous person married a non-Indigenous person, the government revoked their status under the Indian Act. Indigenous folks have and continue to protest discriminatory laws and have made notable gains, albeit reluctant at the government level, with the TRC process. She says until 2005, it was illegal for 2S LGBTQI plus people to marry. It took decades of demonstrations and protests to gain that right, until there was overwhelming outcry. The Alberta government contemplated under Ralph Klein using the notwithstanding clause to exclude queer people in Alberta from their rights. These short examples, says Laura, prove that the government writes the laws, but the people can and should defy the law if it's wrong. Governments are made up by people, and those people make wrong decisions from time to time, and it's up to you, Real Talkers, as citizens to decide if you're willing to stand up for civil rights and stand up for yourself. She says, I know that civil rights leaders often wear with pride the disproportional punishment of government. And I'll tell you, Ryan, that if my union goes on strike and is ordered back to work, I will be on that strike line anyway, right at the front, to protect my members and to take the consequences if necessary. She says, I'm saving up a fund for bail for that eventuality because it's the right thing to do. That from Laura, who's all fired up for this episode of The Flamethrower, which is proudly presented by the DQs in Palisades, Namao, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. When you pop in for a signature stack burger, I recommend The Flamethrower. You let them know that Real Talk sent you. We'll be back at it Monday with Federal Minister Eleanor Olszewski and our regular Supriya Dwivedi, all presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Have an incredible weekend, friends. Maybe I'll see you out tonight at the Taste of Home Gala in support of the Ronald McDonald House Foundation, doing amazing work. And if not, then we'll catch you Monday morning.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton.